In 1927, the New York Yankees outscored their opponents by 376 runs, a number so absurd it reads like a misprint. It was not a misprint. 110 wins, 44 losses, a pennant won by 19 games, a World Series swept in 4 straight, a lineup that batted .307 as a team and led all of baseball in every offensive category that mattered: batting average, home runs, runs batted in, hits, triples, walks, on-base percentage, slugging. All of them. Every single one. Opposing teams did not just lose to the 1927 Yankees, they were broken by them. A St. Louis pitcher said he would rather pitch a doubleheader against any other club than one game against the Yanks. A Washington Senators first baseman, after losing 21-1, put it even more bluntly. Those fellows not only beat you, but they tear your heart out. I wish the season was over right now so we would not have to play them anymore. The season was not over. It was only July. This is the story of the 1927 New York Yankees, Murderers Row, the greatest baseball team ever assembled. The world beyond the ballpark was changing fast in 1927. Charles Lindbergh flew solo across the Atlantic in May. The first talking motion picture, The Jazz Singer, premiered in October. Prohibition was in full swing, and bootleggers were making fortunes. It was the roaring 20s, and nobody roared louder than the New York Yankees. To understand why the 1927 Yankees were so dominant, you have to start with what happened the year before. In 1926, the Yankees won the American League pennant and faced the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. It was supposed to be a coronation. Ruth and Gehrig were at their peak. The Yankees had the most talented roster in baseball. The series went to 7 games. In Game 4, Ruth hit 3 home runs, one of the most legendary individual performances in World Series history. The Yankees seemed destined to win it all. But Game 7 told a different story. With the Cardinals protecting a 3-2 lead in the 7th inning, player-manager Rogers Hornsby made the call that would haunt the Yankees all winter. He brought in 39-year-old Grover Cleveland Alexander from the bullpen. Alexander had pitched a complete game victory just the day before. Some said he was hungover. Some said he was still drunk. Whatever he was, he struck out Tony Lazzeri with the bases loaded to kill the Yankees' rally. Alexander then retired the Yankees in order in the 8th. In the bottom of the 9th, with 2 outs, Ruth drew a walk. The tying run was at first base. Then, inexplicably, Ruth tried to steal second. Catcher Bob O'Farrell fired the ball to Hornsby, who slapped the tag on the Babe. Out. The World Series ended on a caught stealing. It was one of the most shocking endings in postseason history. The loss was humiliating. Ruth's failed steal became a national punchline. The Yankees carried that embarrassment into the offseason, through the winter, and into spring training. When the 1927 season opened at Yankee Stadium on April 12th against the Philadelphia Athletics, this was not just another season. This was a revenge tour. And the revenge would be total. Ruth hit a home run in the first week. The Yankees swept the opening series against the Athletics. They seized first place immediately and never let go. Not for a single day. From the first game of the season to the last, the 1927 New York Yankees were in first place, or tied for first every single day of the season. No other team ever got close. They won 57 of 77 home games at Yankee Stadium, a .750 winning percentage. On the road, where most teams struggle, they went 53-25, destroying opponents in their own ballparks with the same casual brutality they displayed at home. They scored 55 runs in their first 7 games, all victories. The tone was set before most teams had figured out their starting rotations. By late May, they had built a comfortable lead. By late June, the gap was double digits. By mid-July, the pennant race was over. Other teams were playing for second place, and everyone in baseball knew it. The only question left was how many records the Yankees would break before the season ended. The answer was all of them. The heart of the 1927 Yankees was a six-man lineup so terrifying that sportswriters named it after the corridor in the New York City prison known as the Tombs, where condemned killers were held. They called it Murderers' Row. The six men were Earle Combs, Mark Koenig, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Bob Musell, and Tony Lazzeri. They hit first through sixth in the lineup, and they hit everything. It started with Earle Combs, the leadoff hitter they called the Kentucky Colonel. Combs had a career-best season in 1927, hitting .356 with 231 hits, 23 triples, and 137 runs scored. He led the American League in hits and triples. His on-base percentage was .414. His job was simple: get on base so Ruth and Gehrig could drive him in. He did it better than anyone in the league. Combs was a Hall of Famer who spent his entire career in the shadow of his more famous teammates and never once complained about it. He was a quiet, humble Kentuckian who ran the bases with intelligence and played center field with grace. He collected more hits than any other player in the American League that year, reached base at a rate that would make any modern leadoff hitter jealous, and scored runs at a pace that was almost impossible to sustain. And he was the least famous player in his own lineup. Hitting second was Mark Koenig, the shortstop. Koenig hit .285 with 150 hits and kept the line moving between Combs and the two most dangerous hitters in baseball. Years later, Koenig was brutally honest about his own talent. "I was ordinary, very ordinary," he said. "I had small hands and made too many errors. The only thing I had was a powerful arm. I do not think I could have stayed up on any other club. The Yankees could have carried a midget at shortstop. That is how good a club it was." Then came the 3 and 4 hitters, the two most devastating back-to-back bats in baseball history. Babe Ruth batted third. In 1927, he was 32 years old and in the prime of his extraordinary powers. He hit .356 with 60 home runs, 164 runs batted in, 158 runs scored, and 137 walks. His slugging percentage was .772. His on-base percentage was .486. His wins above replacement was 12.6, the third highest single-season WAR in the history of baseball. The 60 home runs broke his own record of 59, set in 1921. No player had ever hit 60. The number was so enormous that it was higher than the home run total of the entire Boston Red Sox roster, which hit just 28 as a team. Ruth, one man, more than doubled the output of an entire franchise. The entire Philadelphia Athletics hit 44 home runs. Ruth alone hit 16 more than that. Early in the season, Ruth himself doubted he could break the record. He said, "I do not suppose I will ever break that 1921 record. To do that, you have got to start early, and the pitchers have got to pitch to you. I do not start early, and the pitchers have not really pitched to me in 4 seasons. I get more bad balls to hit than any other 5 men, and fewer good ones." He was wrong. He hit 17 home runs in September alone, the greatest closing stretch in baseball history. His 60th came on September 30th, the second-to-last game of the season, off Washington Senators pitcher Tom Zachary. It was a 2-run shot in the bottom of the 8th inning that won the game 4-2. Ruth was ecstatic. "60! Count them 60!" he shouted afterward. "Let us see some other son of a bitch match that." The record would stand for 34 years until Roger Maris hit 61 in 1961. Ruth's salary was $70,000. That was more than the next 5 Yankees starters combined. It was more than the entire payroll of some opposing teams. He called all of his teammates kid because he could not remember their names. But here is what made the 1927 Yankees truly terrifying. Ruth was not even the most productive hitter on his own team. Lou Gehrig batted cleanup right behind Ruth. He was 24 years old, broad-shouldered, muscular, and built like a man who had spent his youth carrying blocks of ice up tenement stairs in Manhattan, which he had. He was in the early prime of a career that would define consistency and durability for generations. In 1927, Gehrig hit .373 with 218 hits, 52 doubles, 18 triples, 47 home runs, and 175 runs batted in. That RBI total was a record at the time and still stands as one of the highest single-season marks in American League history. His slugging percentage was .765. His WAR was 11.9, the sixth highest single-season WAR in baseball history. Gehrig won the American League Most Valuable Player award. Ruth was not eligible because of the old rules that prohibited repeat winners from receiving the award. But even if Ruth had been eligible, Gehrig's case was overwhelming. He led the league in doubles, RBI, total bases, and OPS. He was the complete package, a hitter with power, average, and patience who also played flawless defense at first base. The contrast between Ruth and Gehrig was striking. Ruth was loud, flamboyant, overweight, and beloved by the press. Gehrig was quiet, humble, powerfully built, and largely ignored by reporters who preferred Ruth's colorful quotes. Ruth stayed out until dawn. Gehrig went home to his mother's apartment. Ruth was the showman, Gehrig was the machine. What made the Ruth-Gehrig combination so lethal was the way they protected each other. Pitchers could not pitch around Ruth because Gehrig was waiting behind him. If you walked Ruth, you had to face a man hitting .373 with 47 home runs. There was no safe option. Throw to Ruth and he might hit it over the stadium. Walk Ruth and Gehrig might hit it even further. It was the most terrifying 3 and 4 combination in baseball history, and opposing managers lost sleep trying to figure out a strategy that did not exist. Ruth himself acknowledged it. Pitchers began pitching to me because if they passed me, they still had Lou to contend with. Together, Ruth and Gehrig combined for 107 home runs. The entire Boston Red Sox hit 28. 2 men on one team hit nearly 4 times as many home runs as every player on another team combined. That is not dominance. That is a mathematical impossibility that somehow happened anyway. And yet, Gehrig made only $8,000 that year. Ruth made nearly 9 times more. The gap in their fame was even wider than the gap in their paychecks. Behind Ruth and Gehrig, the damage continued. Bob Musel hit 5th, batting .337 with 174 hits and 103 runs batted in. On any other team in baseball, those numbers would have made him the undisputed star of the roster, the player whose name appeared in every headline, the player fans bought tickets to see. On the 1927 Yankees, he was an afterthought. A footnote, the 5th best hitter in a lineup where the 3rd and 4th hitters were the 2 most famous athletes on the planet. Musel had one of the strongest throwing arms in the American League. Runners rarely tested him. He was a quiet professional hitter who drove in runs with mechanical consistency and played left field with the kind of effortless grace that made difficult plays look routine. He never got the attention he deserved because he happened to play on the same team as the 2 most famous hitters in the world. In baseball history, there may be no player more underrated than Bob Musel. Tony Lazzari hit 6th. He batted .309 with 18 home runs and 102 runs batted in. Lazzari was the first Italian-American star in baseball history, a pioneer who opened the door for Joe DiMaggio and generations of Italian-American players who came after him. He played the entire 1927 season while secretly battling epilepsy, a condition that carried enormous stigma at the time. He never spoke about it publicly. He just played. Lazzari was a clutch hitter, a smart base runner, and a future Hall of Famer who had arrived in the Bronx just 1 year earlier as a 22-year-old who had hit 60 home runs in the Pacific Coast League. He carried the scar of his Game 7 strikeout against Alexander in the 1926 World Series, and he used that scar as fuel for the entire 1927 season. Like Musel and Combs, his individual greatness was swallowed by the enormity of the team around him. St. Louis pitcher Milt Gaston summed up the experience of facing this lineup. He said, "I would rather pitch a doubleheader against any other club than one game against the Yanks." Most people remember the 1927 Yankees for their hitting. That is understandable. When your team has Babe Ruth hitting 60 home runs and Lou Gehrig driving in 175 runs, the pitching tends to get overlooked. But the pitching staff was just as dominant in its own way, and without it, the Yankees would not have won 110 games. The Yankees led the American League in earned run average at 3.20. They threw 12 shutouts. In 43 games, their opponents scored only 1 run. That means in roughly 1 out of every 4 games, the other team scored 1 run or fewer. 6 different pitchers recorded double-digit wins. The staff was deep, balanced, and ruthlessly effective. The ace was Waite Hoyt, a right-hander who went 22-7 with a 2.63 ERA. He tied for the American League lead in wins. Hoyt was a future Hall of Famer who had already won 2 World Series with the Yankees earlier in the decade. He was steady, reliable, and nearly unhittable in big moments. Off the field, he was an accomplished vaudeville performer and painter. On the mound, he was all business. Behind Hoyt was Herb Pennock, a left-hander who went 19-8. Pennock was another future Hall of Famer, a crafty pitcher who relied on location, movement, and deception rather than overpowering stuff. He had been pitching in the major leagues since 1912 and had developed the kind of guile that only comes from 15 years of facing the best hitters in the world. He would prove crucial in the World Series, throwing a near-perfect game in Game 3 despite nursing a bruised kneecap. The surprise of the staff was Wilcie Moore, a 30-year-old sinker ball specialist who had spent years grinding through the minor leagues, pitching in small towns for small money, waiting for a chance that most people thought would never come. Moore went 19-7 with a 2.28 ERA, the lowest in the American League. He worked as both a starter and the team's go-to arm out of the bullpen, a prototype for the modern closer decades before the role existed. In today's game, a pitcher with Moore's versatility and effectiveness would be worth tens of millions of dollars. In 1927, he was just another Yankee nobody talked about. Then there was Urban Shocker, who won 18 games while quietly dying. Shocker had a heart condition caused by an infected heart valve, so severe that he slept sitting upright in a chair every night because he could not breathe lying down. He told no one outside the clubhouse about his condition. He just kept taking the ball every 5th day, kept winning games, kept pretending everything was fine. He would be dead by September of 1928, less than a year after helping the Yankees win the World Series. He was only 38 years old. Shocker's story is one of the most quietly heroic in baseball history, and it is almost never told because it happened on a team where Ruth hit 60 home runs and Gehrig drove in 175. That was the 1927 Yankees in a nutshell. A team so loaded with talent that future Hall of Famers were afterthoughts. Dying men won 18 games without anyone noticing, and a pitcher with the lowest ERA in the league was barely mentioned in the newspapers. One of the great subplots of the 1927 season was the home run race between Ruth and Gehrig. For most of the summer, it was not clear which Yankee would break Ruth's record. The entire country was watching. Through June, Gehrig actually nudged ahead of Ruth in the home run count. The 24-year-old was out-hitting the greatest slugger in history. The New York World Telegram anointed Gehrig the favorite to break the record. Reporters who had spent years following Ruth's every move suddenly began crowding around Gehrig's locker. By early August, Gehrig had 38 home runs to Ruth's 35. The kid was beating the king. For a few glorious weeks, it looked like Lou Gehrig, not Babe Ruth, would own the single-season home run record. But Ruth was not the kind of man who let anyone stay ahead of him for long. He caught Gehrig in late August and then pulled away with a September for the ages. 17 home runs in the final month. Gehrig could not keep up. He finished with 47, a number that would have shattered the single-season record on any other team in any other year. In 1926, the American League leader had hit 47. Gehrig matched that total and still finished 13 behind his own teammate. Ruth later gave Gehrig some credit for his record-breaking season. "Pitchers began pitching to me," Ruth said, "because if they passed me, they still had Lou to contend with." It was a rare moment of generosity from a man not known for sharing the spotlight. It was the perfect metaphor for Gehrig's entire career. No matter how great he was, Babe Ruth was always one step ahead. By September, the pennant race had been over for months. The Philadelphia Athletics, managed by the legendary Connie Mack and featuring slugger Al Simmons and pitcher Lefty Grove, were a legitimately great team. They would win 3 consecutive pennants and 2 World Series starting in 1929. They were not weak. They were not rebuilding. They were excellent, and they finished 19 games behind the Yankees. Al Simmons was honest about it. "We were good, a really great team. But when you compare us with the great Yankee world champions who preceded us, we simply were not in their class. I'm not trying to kid myself, nor anyone else. I fought those Yankees as hard as any man in the American League. But when they got us into a tough series, they just batted our brains out." The Yankees clinched the American League pennant with weeks to spare. They finished with 110 wins, breaking the American League record of 105 set by the 1912 Boston Red Sox. That record would stand until the 1954 Cleveland Indians won 111. But those Indians were swept in the World Series. The 1927 Yankees swept theirs. The World Series matched the Yankees against the Pittsburgh Pirates, who had won the National League pennant behind most valuable player Paul Waner, a 24-year-old outfielder who hit .380 with 131 runs batted in. His brother Lloyd hit .355. Together, the Waner brothers had carried the Pirates to 94 wins. When Babe Ruth was shown a photograph of the Waner brothers before the series, he studied their slight frames and said, "Why, they are just kids. If I was that little, I would be afraid of getting hurt." The day before Game 1 at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, the Yankees took batting practice. What happened next became one of the most famous stories in baseball history, a story that has been told and retold so many times that the line between fact and legend has blurred completely. The Pirates came out of their dugout to watch. They had won 94 games. They had the National League most valuable player in Paul Waner. They were not pushovers, but what they saw on that practice field shook them to their core. Ruth and Gehrig began launching ball after ball into the right field stands. Not fly balls, but rockets, screaming line drives that cleared the fence and crashed into the upper deck, with a sound like gunshots. Ruth finally knocked one completely out of the park in right center, over everything and into the street. Musel and Lazzeri hammered balls into the left field seats. Even Herb Pennock, a pitcher, was hit above the kneecap by a screaming liner during the session. The Pirates who saw it were reportedly more afraid of facing the Yankees hitting than happy about possibly not having to face Pennock. The Pirates players watched in stunned silence. One by one, they turned and walked back into the clubhouse. Some of them were shaking their heads. Ruth told the story years later, "We won the World Series before it even got started. We really put on a show. Lou and I banged ball after ball into the right field stands. One by one, the Pirates got up and left the park. Some of them were shaking their heads when we last saw them." Pirates manager Donnie Bush reportedly told his players before Game 1, "Let us go out on the ball field and hope we do not all get killed." Some historians have debated whether the batting practice intimidation story was embellished over the years, but the result was not debatable. The Yankees destroyed the Pirates. Game 1 at Forbes Field. Yankees 5, Pirates 4. Waite Hoyt pitched a complete game. The governor of Pennsylvania, John Fisher, was in attendance, along with New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker and Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis seated near the Yankees dugout. A brass band in red coats paraded around the field before the first pitch. Ruth singled in his first at bat of the series. Gehrig tripled to drive in 2 runs in the first inning, giving Hoyt the cushion he needed. Game 2 at Forbes Field, Yankees 6, Pirates 2. George Pipgraw threw a complete game. Gehrig ripped 2 doubles and drove in multiple runs. The game was never in doubt after the 3rd inning. The Yankees' bats were even louder than the batting practice session had promised. Game 3 at Yankee Stadium, Yankees 8, Pirates 1. Herb Pennock, despite the batting practice bruise on his kneecap, threw a brilliant 3-hitter. He retired the first 22 batters he faced before giving up a hit in the 8th inning. Ruth hit a home run deep into the right field stands. The game was a massacre from the first pitch. Game 4 at Yankee Stadium, Yankees 4, Pirates 3. This was the only close game of the series, and it ended in the most dramatic fashion possible. In the bottom of the 9th inning, with the score tied 3-3, Earle Combs walked. Mark Koenig bunted him to second and beat the throw for a single. Ruth was intentionally walked to load the bases. Gehrig stepped to the plate with the bases loaded and nobody out. He struck out. Musel struck out looking. Suddenly, the Pirates had life. Tony Lazzeri came to bat. He fouled a pitch deep into the left field bleachers. Then Johnny Milgus, the Pirates pitcher, uncorked a wild pitch. Combs raced home from third. The series was over. It remains the only World Series in history to end on a wild pitch. The Yankees had won their 2nd championship. The first had come in 1923. This one felt different. This one felt inevitable. From the first day of spring training to the last pitch of October, the 1927 New York Yankees had been the most dominant force in baseball, and now it was official. The Yankees had swept the Pittsburgh Pirates in 4 games. They outscored them 23 runs to 10. Ruth hit 400 for the series with 2 home runs, the only home runs hit by either team in the entire series. Not a single Pittsburgh Pirate managed to hit one out of the park. Gehrig contributed 2 triples and 4 runs batted in. The pitching staff posted a collective 2.78 earned run average across 4 games. It was the first time an American League team had swept a World Series in 4 games. The following year, the Yankees would sweep the St. Louis Cardinals as well, becoming the only franchise in baseball history to sweep consecutive World Series. They remain the only franchise to have accomplished that feat. The 1927 New York Yankees sent 6 players to the Baseball Hall of Fame: Ruth, Gehrig, Combs, Lazzeri, Hoyt, and Pennock. Add manager Miller Huggins, team president Ed Barrow, and owner Colonel Jacob Ruppert, and the total reaches 9 Hall of Famers from one roster. Manager Miller Huggins deserves special mention. He was a small man, barely 5 feet 6 inches tall and 140 pounds, managing the biggest personalities in baseball history. Ruth towered over him by nearly a foot. Gehrig outweighed him by 70 pounds. Yet Huggins commanded the respect of every man in that clubhouse through sheer intelligence and force of will. He kept Ruth in line, which was no small feat. Ruth drank heavily. He stayed out all night. He chased women across every city in the American League. He once showed up to the ballpark so hungover that he could barely stand. Huggins fined him, benched him, and him and never backed down. When Ruth tried to get him fired by going over his head to the team's owner, Huggins stood firm. Eventually, Ruth respected him for it. Everyone did. Huggins built a team that balanced power with pitching, ego with chemistry, and individual brilliance with collective purpose. He understood that having the most talented roster in baseball meant nothing if the players did not play together. He made them play together. Huggins died just 2 years later, in 1929, at the age of 50, from a blood infection that spread through his body in a matter of days. The Yankees erected a monument to him in center field at Yankee Stadium, the first of many monuments that would eventually form Monument Park. It was the first time any team had honored a manager that way. It would not be the last. Nearly a century later, the 1927 Yankees remain the standard by which all other teams are measured. Every great team that comes along is inevitably compared to Murderers Row, and every great team falls short in one way or another. The 1998 Yankees won 114 games and swept the World Series, but they played 162 games instead of 154. The 1906 Cubs won 116 games but lost the World Series to the crosstown White Sox. The 2001 Seattle Mariners won 116 games but did not even reach the World Series, losing to the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. The 1954 Cleveland Indians won 111 games but were swept in the World Series by the New York Giants. None of them had what the 1927 Yankees had. None of them had two players simultaneously producing top 10 all-time single-season WARS. None of them had a lineup where the fifth hitter drove in 103 runs and was considered an afterthought. None of them outscored their opponents by 376 runs. None of them won the pennant by 19 games and then swept the World Series without breaking a sweat. The 1927 Yankees won 110 regular season games and 4 more in the World Series, finishing with a combined record of 114 wins and 44 losses. A winning percentage of .721, the highest full-season mark in American League history. Nobody has matched it since. They had 2 of the top 10 single-season WARS in baseball history on the same team. They had a lineup where 4 future Hall of Famers batted consecutively. They had a pitching staff where the best ERA in the American League belonged to a 30-year-old rookie nobody had heard of. They had a dying man who won 18 games without telling anyone he was sick. They had Babe Ruth hitting 60 home runs and Lou Gehrig hitting 47, and the 2 of them combined for more home runs than every player on the Red Sox roster put together. They had a batting practice session that may or may not have broken the Pittsburgh Pirates' spirit before the World Series even started. And they had a nickname borrowed from a prison corridor for condemned men, Murderers Row, because that is what they did to opposing pitchers. They murdered them, pitch after pitch, game after game, week after week, month after month. There was no escape. There was no off night. There was only the Yankees waiting in the batter's box, ready to tear your heart out. Babe Ruth said it simply: those Yankees were the best team. Al Simmons, the man who fought them harder than anyone, agreed. Mark Koenig, the man who admitted he could not have played shortstop anywhere else, agreed. Every opponent who faced them, every pitcher who walked off the mound shaking his head, every manager who wished the season was already over, agreed. They were the best team. Nearly 100 years later, nobody has proven them wrong. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.